After the arrival of the Deutsches Afrika Korps, also known as DAK, the British lost ground rapidly. The Germans, together with the Italians, quickly captured El Agheila, and in April the Axis forces had reached as far as Sollum in Egypt. The only problem for the Germans was the port of Tobruk, which was still in Allied hands. The British commander of the Western Desert Force, General Sir Archibald Wavell, told Churchill that his army was far more inferior to the German and Italian army. Churchill then ordered reinforcements in the form of tanks and other supplies. German forces had spent lots of resources trying to capture Tobruk. They were running out of fuel and ammunition. Rommel was ordered to stop his assault on Tobruk, as every resource was needed in Russia for Operation Barbarossa. The message, which stated the lack of German fuel and ammunition, saw British eyes, and General Sir Wavell quickly set up Operation Brevity, a smaller operation with the objectives being the Halfaya Pass, the town of Sollum, and Fort Capuzzo. They had to destroy as many German and Italian equipment and maintain a foothold for the larger Operation Battle Axe. Brevity began on May 15, 1941, and quick successes were made. The Halfaya Pass was captured, as well as Fort Capuzzo. On the 16th of May, however, Lieutenant General William Gott was concerned that his 22nd Guards Brigade would be wiped out at Fort Capuzzo, so he ordered his men to fall back to the Halfaya Pass. Brevity ended on the 17th, with the pass being the only objective captured. On the 27th of May 1941, a small group of Germans recaptured the important Halfaya Pass. The British were back to square one. Another problem occurred for Operation Battle Axe. Crete was captured at the end of May, making all its airports fall into German hands. Good news for the British came in the form of Churchill's reinforcements, but due to the new tanks, Operation Battle Axe had to be postponed for the first time, as the newly arrived tanks had to be adapted for desert use. The plan for the attack was ready on the 28th of May. German and Italian forces were to be defeated at Halfaya, Sollum and Capuzzo on the Libya-Egyptian border, using three main axes of attack: one along the coast, in the middle along the escarpment, and on the left to attack the Hafid Ridge. After these positions had been captured, 13th Corps was to secure the Tobruk and El Adem sector. The town of Derma and Micheli were the third and final objectives for the operation. The original date of attack was the 7th of June, but not everybody had received their new tanks, so the attack was postponed to the 15th. After Operation Brevity, the Germans built better defensive lines to stop a possible new offensive. They created a line of fortified positions from Halfaya to Sidi al-Zeiz. This consisted of anti-tank guns and mines. The defense at the border was the task of the German 15th Panzer Division, who had just received a new commander, General Walter Neumann-Silkov. A message by the 7th Armored Brigade stating that the attack would commence was intercepted by the Afrika Korps 9 hours prior to the attack. This gave Rommel time to send his 5th Light Division to the Libya-Egyptian border. At 5:15 in the morning, the British moved out. The Halfaya group, which was tasked with the capture of the escarpment, consisted of the 2nd Cameron Highlanders and 13 tanks of C Squadron, 4th Royal Tank Regiment. Supporting artillery was provided by the 31st Field Regiment. To their right, below the escarpment, were the 1st Battalion of the 6th Rajputana Rifles and the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Maharata Light Infantry. In support were 2 troops of A Squadron from the 4th Royal Tank Regiment. British artillery was scheduled to fire on top of the Halfaya Pass at exactly 5:40, but they came bogged down due to loose sand. At 6 AM, C Squadron's commander ordered his tanks to attack the top of the pass. Soon after, the German and Italian defenders opened fire with their anti-tank guns, and all but one light tank and a Matilda were destroyed in a couple of hours. The Cameron Highlanders pressed forward, but they too were quickly stopped by armoured cars and motorised infantry. A Squadron, 4th Royal Tank Regiment, below the escarpment, had lost 4 tanks due to anti-tank mines, and the Indian infantry was repelled by the defenders. The Rajputanas even lost their commander in one of the failed assaults. The 12 remaining tanks of A Squadron 4th Royal Tank Regiment were positioned to the left of the 7th Royal Tank Regiment. A Squadron had initial success at battle position 38. They captured several guns and they took 200 prisoners, with nearly to no loss. A Squadron's tanks kept moving forward to their next objective, point 206. Heavy casualties occurred and the Germans counterattacked at battle position 38. Although position 38 remained in British hands, only one of the initial 12 tanks remained in working condition. B Squadron of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment, which was kept in reserve, was moved to point 206, which they captured. In total around 500 German and Italian prisoners were made. The British exploited their success and sent out the 2nd Scots Guards, which was a part of the 22nd Guard Brigade. They were able to advance further, and they even captured an outpost near Musaid. By noon, the 7th Armoured Regiment had captured Fort Capuzzo. The scattered defenders fell back to the 15th Panzer Division. The 8th Panzer Regiment of the 15th Panzer Division quickly counterattacked, but fortunately for the British, these assaults were repelled. At 6:30 p.m, the Germans attacked again, but with the help of the 22nd Guards Brigade, the tanks of the 7th Royal Tank Regiment managed to repulse it. Most of the German attacks were small, as Rommel was cautious, because he wanted to wait until he knew the entire situation. Rommel did order his 5th Leichte Armee to prepare for battle as a countermeasure after Fort Capuzzo was captured. On the left of the assault with the 7th Armoured Brigade, the 6th Royal Tank Regiment, equipped with the newly arrived Crusader tanks, was positioned behind the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment with all the cruiser tanks. This in order to keep the Crusader tanks, a new British weapon, as a surprise to the Germans. At 9 AM in the morning, the British reached the Hafid Ridge. After the 2nd Tank Regiment crossed the first ridge, heavy action occurred. The tanks had stumbled upon dug-in anti-tank guns. 2 A9 cruisers were destroyed before they could retreat. The first ridge formed a serious obstacle for the British assault. No artillery support could be given, and the tanks lacked firepower and high explosive shells to deal with the threat. A flanking attack was ordered. This went well in the beginning. The Germans were caught unaware, and the British tanks inflicted heavy casualties to the defenders. The British only lost 1 tank in the process. The British attackers then approached point 208. The assault was ordered to halt as soon as the commander became aware of point 208's fortifications. Due to a lack of radios, 5 tanks did not receive the message and continued to roll forward until they were destroyed by Flak 88s from point 208. The Royal Air Force soon reported that German panzers were coming. The ridges had to be cleared in order to have a good vantage point to start the oncoming tank battle. The Germans had however forged a cunning plan. They lured the British tanks into a trap when the British followed the German trucks, which served as bait. When the British Crusader tanks reached the second ridge, they were fired upon at point-blank range. Within a couple of minutes, 11 Crusader tanks were destroyed, a further 6 were heavily damaged. At the end of the first day, multiple German reinforcements arrived on the battlefield. Although Fort Capuzzo had been captured, the Halfaya Pass and the Hafid Ridge remained in German hands. The British lost a significant number of tanks, and the baptism of fire of the new Crusader tanks could not have gone any worse. The 2nd Tank Regiment was down to 28 cruiser tanks. The 6th Tank Regiment, equipped with the new Crusaders, was down to 20 tanks of the initial 50. The 4th Armoured Brigade started the day with 100 Matildas. At the end of the first day, they only had 37 Matildas left. The next day, the British continued their attack at the Halfaya Pass, but again all attacks were in vain. The German defenders at the pass were however getting surrounded and couldn't retreat. At the same time, the British wanted to spare the few surviving Matildas, so no further actions were made. At Fort Capuzzo, which was now under the British flag, the German 15th Panzer Division attacked. The German attack was a failure from the get-go. The 80-tank-strong force was divided into two columns. Both columns soon met heavy 25-pounder fire and fire from the entrenched Matildas at the fort. By 10 o'clock in the morning, Neumann Silkov lost a whopping 50 of his 80 panzers, which started the attack. At noon, the Germans were forced to withdraw. After the German withdrawal, the 2nd Scots Guards advanced, capturing the Sollum barracks, preventing the Germans to flank on the east or to link up with the Halfaya garrison. At dawn, the German 5th Light Army pressed southward, because they were armed with the far superior Panzer IV and IIIs. The British were no match to them. The Germans weakened the British 7th Armoured Brigade and 7th Support Group. Rommel, seeing a weak link in the British side at the 7th Armoured Brigade, ordered his 15th Panzer Army to attack it. Rommel wanted to cut off the majority of the British forces by a sickle move. In the afternoon, the commander of the British Desert Force, Wavell, flew closer to the front line to make decisions easier. The commander of the Indian forces, Frank Messervy, had however taken the initiative, and he had ordered his Matildas to retreat. At the end of the day, the 7th Armoured Brigade had lost half of its operational tanks. The 4th Armoured Brigade had 17 running Matildas left. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Rommel's divisions met the 7th Armoured Brigade after an hour-and-a-half drive from their starting positions. 2 hours later, at 8 o'clock in the morning, the Germans reached Sidi Suleiman. At Fort Capuzzo, Messervy saw the German movements and assumed that a German attack was imminent. He immediately cancelled the order of pushing his 4th Armoured Brigade out to help the 7th Armoured Brigade. At 10 in the morning, the Germans tightened the noose. They went straight for Halfaya, possibly cutting off all British forces at Capuzzo. Multiple British tanks were still at Capuzzo to defend the corridor of escape. At 4 p.m, the Germans reached Halfaya, but the British had stalled the advance long enough in order for the 22nd Guards Brigade to escape. Operation Battle Axe was over. It turned out to be a failure for the British. Churchill was far from happy with the meagre result. He sacked commanding officer Wavell and pointed out a new commanding officer for the Western Desert Force. General Claude Auchinleck was appointed new commander of the British forces in the desert. During the 3-day offensive, the British suffered 122 men killed, 588 wounded, and 259 missing men, making a total of 969 Allied casualties. The Germans had 93 killed, 350 wounded, and 235 missing, making a total of 678 casualties. The Italians suffered 592 casualties. A total of 98 British tanks were lost. Because the Germans captured their lost ground, they were able to repair most of their 50 lost tanks. In the end, 12 German panzers were written off. I hope you enjoyed this small documentary about Operation Battle Axe. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment down below. If you like these sort of documentaries, feel free to check out my other ones. Cheers!